Welcome into another edition of the Five Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham, joined as always by Ethan Skolnick. You can find us on 5reasonsports.com. That's where you find all the information about all of our podcasts, all 15 of the podcasts in the network, where you can listen to them, where you can subscribe. And also we have plenty of written content there as well, covering all of South Florida sports. As the news comes in, we'll have it all covered at 5reasonsports.com. A lot of great opinion pieces there as well. So 5reasonsports.com is where you find everything that we're doing. Find us on Twitter at 5reasonsports and the same handle on Instagram as well. Now we're dealing with a little bit of audio difficulties today, so Ethan is joining me not from his usual professional setup, but from the audio on his computer. But we're going to press on talking about the NBA today. We're now at a stage, Ethan, where there are 3 games left in every series, and 3 of them are really good. And I actually want to start with the series that is probably going to end the quickest, and that is Milwaukee and Boston, because of the 4 that could potentially have had upsets in them, this is the one that you called. Milwaukee now leads by 3-1, winning both games in Boston, which I think was a shock, particularly after the way that Game 1 went. Where do you think this series maybe went against what you thought might happen, Ethan?
Yeah, that plus 240 not looking so good right now, Chris, at all. I think, well, one thing that could not happen in this series if Boston was going to win was for Kyrie to underperform. And I just think with all the issues that Boston has had this year, I talked a lot about how Boston I thought could be a little like the 06 Heat, not necessarily winning a championship, but a team that didn't look right during the regular season, but had a lot of pieces that might work better in the playoffs. And that, to me, the big thing was, though, Kyrie had to play like Dwayne did and had to sort of carry that group so that everybody else kind of fell into line. Well, Kyrie has not played like Dwayne did. And if that's not going to happen, then I think what happens with that team is that others don't really understand what their roles are. It's never been completely figured out this year. And look, I think to a certain degree, I did what I accused others of doing during the regular season, which is I underestimated Milwaukee. They're not just Giannis. They've got guys playing at a higher level than I've seen in a long time. George Hill's playing at a higher level than he's played at in a long time. Some of their supporting pieces, who I didn't know if they would step up in this situation, have done so. And so, defensively, they've been very, very sound. And so I think we've got to give some credit to the Bucks and to Bud in particular. There was some question. You raised it on a previous podcast. Is this a guy who's mostly a regular season coach? He gets a team to 60 wins, but we saw what happened with the Hawks. And, now we're in a situation where, they can close this thing out pretty quickly. And I did not really see that coming. So, to go win in Boston, get those 2 games and have Giannis come out the other side. And I think that's part of this sort of maturity that we see with real superstars is, LeBron had struggles at times early on in the playoffs, but he came out the other side. Teams threw different things in him. He had to adjust, and he has. Now, I don't think Kyrie has shrunk in the moment. I just don't think he's shooting particularly well. That happens, but they cannot, as a team, survive that, and it will lead to other questions now, because as soon as that series is over, provided that Milwaukee doesn't squander it, it's about where Kyrie goes next. And a lot of what sort of Danny Ainge has put together, that house of cards could fall apart.
And I do want to talk a lot in this podcast about supporting players and kind of the role that they've either played or not played for varying teams in the playoffs. I think supporting players are kind of determining a lot right now, which is kind of surprising to think about, because we think of the playoffs as a very star-driven time of year. But I think Boston's getting nothing from their supporting players. They got a total of 7 points from their bench, including 2 points from Gordon Hayward, who's been awful in this series, done absolutely nothing. But I do want to kind of talk about what felt like a momentous moment last night for Giannis Antetokounmpo, because he goes into a fourth quarter of a close game and just absolutely lays waste to the Boston Celtics. And that's a level that superstars have to jump to, where it's not just you're playing really well, you're playing really well in a playoff series, you counter adjust to things that other teams are throwing at you. But when it's a fourth quarter of a game and you can step on the neck of the opposing team and you do it, and it seems like, you're taking off, like doing the things he does in the regular season, doing a Euro step from 20 feet from the basket and finishing at the rim. He had, the exclamation point dunk in the final minute of the game that I tweeted out this morning, because I was watching the highlights back, and it's just incredible what he can do on the basketball floor, and doing that to close out a team, or basically all but close out a team. And obviously, we've seen teams come back from 3-1 down, but to basically all but close out a team, win 2 games on the road with that fourth quarter performance, when we're talking about wanting to see these star breakouts of certain players come playoff time, I think there's been a lot of opportunity for players in these NBA playoffs to do that, and Giannis seized his last night. Efficient 15 of 22, finishing at the rim. He had like 26 points in the paint. Like he does all the things that he does in the regular season in the playoffs. And we talked about this last week in our NBA podcast, that it's not necessarily about rising to another level, but rather maintaining the level that you perform in the regular season. And Giannis turned in these kinds of performances all the time in the regular season. And last night in Boston, on the road in a Game 4 that you can win to basically all but deliver the knockout blow, he comes up with that incredible fourth quarter performance to really seal that victory. And I think that's a major step forward for him in his career, particularly heading towards his conference finals against either Toronto or Philadelphia, heading towards maybe an NBA finals against either Golden State or Houston or whoever comes out from the Western Conference. Those are the kind of moments that feel like, okay, that was his star turn in the postseason, rather than kind of being this highlight factor that he's been in the regular season.
Yeah, and can we put aside the myth that Boston is an impossible place to go get a win for a superstar? Because we just saw Giannis do a little bit of what LeBron did. And what was similar about it to me is Giannis does things his way. He doesn't, we talk about adjustment, and he's made some, but pretty much he's just sort of does what he does better than everybody else. And there's not really a hell of a lot that you can do against that. And that's one of the things where I don't know if it was Windhorst or Mark Stein or one of the guests we had that was talking about that, or maybe it was Matt Moore, that there really isn't a whole lot of adjustment that could be made to Giannis. I think Boston tried some things, and now, they're kind of up Schitt's Creek here at the end. To me, the fascinating part of this is that, the Celtics came into this season, and the whole idea was they have so much talent, right? They have so much talent in so many places. They're getting Kyrie back. They're getting Hayward back. And, you just got experience for the 3 young guys in particular, and Rozier, Tatum, and Brown. And you still have Horford, and you re-sign Marcus Smart to that contract, and you're just so loaded up that you're never going to go through droughts. Like that was the whole thing. And this team goes through droughts. Like if Kyrie is not shooting well, like you said, the Gordon Hayward thing, it looked like he turned a corner. In fact, I read something where he said it was the Miami game, actually, where he felt like, okay, it all sort of come back together again, and now it's fallen apart, and they don't have another place to go. And I guess when you're Danny Ainge and you're building this thing, the idea was you're going to have so many options. And I just wonder if what happened this year, we're trying to force Hayward back in. Obviously you want to, Kyrie was going to be your lead guy, but to me, you've kind of lost a year of development with, I don't know what Rozier is at this point, but you've lost a year of development with Tatum and Brown, because I don't know that this year was good for them. I feel like they were emerging into something, and now they're not. And now they just look sort of young and mistake prone a lot. And so I was fooled by it. I thought this could be a team that could turn the corner. I thought Milwaukee reminded me a little of some of those sort of number 1 seeded Indiana teams, or some of the other teams we've seen, the number 1 seeded Atlanta team that was just not as good as its regular season pedigree. But I think we got to take the Bucks very seriously. I mean, the first round series, no, but it is a talented team they're going against, and they've made adjustments, and their superstar has looked like a superstar. Just like for Toronto, their superstar has looked like a superstar. And that's the only chance that you have to beat a Golden State. The Harden thing aside, because he hasn't shot all that well, and we'll talk about the other side of the bracket. But I've been very impressed. Less so disappointed with Boston as impressed with Milwaukee. Boston, we've kind of seen this in and out all year. But for Milwaukee to play at this level in the playoffs has been a little surprising.
Yeah, and quickly on Boston, and then I want to close in Milwaukee, but when you're getting nothing out of a $31.2 million player, it's just hard. And we can talk about Danny Ainge maybe screwing things, some things up, and not having the depth that maybe he could have based off of what he's, amassed in terms of assets, and frankly still has. I mean, they still have 3 first-round picks this year, as incredible as that is to believe, even though none of them are particularly good. But when you look at the amassing of talent, and Boston just getting nothing from a $31 million player, like there just aren't very many teams that can succeed that way. That amount of money going to a player that's basically given you nothing. I think Haley O'Shaughnessy wrote for The Ringer that I think he's a minus 49 in his last 3 games, has 17 combined points in the last 3 games of this series that have all been losses for the Celtics. That's $31 million for negative play, for play that hurts you. So there's just no recovering that from that. But from a Milwaukee perspective, I think there's a rush, and we'll certainly get to this plenty over the course of this pod when it comes to talking about certain teams. When particularly role players struggle early on in series, particularly in home losses, there was a rush to kind of write those guys off. And I remember after Game 1, the story was that Boston had figured out a way to wall off Giannis, force him to pass to teammates that were fairly unreliable. Can you really trust Eric Bledsoe in a playoff series, George Hill in a playoff series, Chris Middleton in a playoff series, Brook Lopez shooting threes in a playoff series, Pat Connaughton is getting big-time minutes for this team, Ersan Ilyasova is a player that Heat fans certainly know you can trust in a playoff series, but do we know that he could do it in this series? So I do want to give an immense amount of credit, because you saw last night the big shots that they were hitting. Pat Connaughton in particular coming out with big blocks and big shots as well. Those guys around Giannis have stepped up as well, and you kind of think of it as a regular season team. Just those names in particular, the non-Giannis players, you think of them as a regular season team that, when it comes playoff time, other teams wouldn't mind if those guys made shots. But Eric Bledsoe did really well driving towards the rim last night. The outside guys made big shots at big times. And I think now there is kind of a serious dividing point between role players in these playoffs. There are either guys that you trust and guys that you don't trust in certain moments. I think Toronto is seeing a real slippage in players that have gone from leading a bench unit that was one of the best units in the entire league a year ago to trusting none of them, like Fred VanVleet. You can't even play anymore. Whereas Milwaukee is figuring out a way for all of their guys to succeed, and they're succeeding in these big moments that are deciding series. Like, it is weird to see George Hill, going on a heat check run where he has like 7 points in a minute, and he's deciding a playoff game when, a year ago we might have thought of him as unplayable at times for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think that kind of dividing line is what's separating the good teams from the great teams in these playoffs so far.
We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first I want to tell you about a great new sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is ShipYourCarNow.com. These guys can move any car, boat, RV, motorcycle, or equipment anywhere you need worldwide. You have a business and need to ship freight or machinery? Call them. College moves, new car, used car, buying the toy you've looked at for a while? Call them. These guys can ship it all, so give them a call. Here's the number, 1-800-264-4644. That's 1-800-264-4644, or visit shipyourcarnow.com/5 reasons. Also, make sure to mention 5 reasons on the phone. I wish they'd had this when I was going to college. This would have been great for me. I needed to get my car down from Baltimore to Florida. I ended up taking the auto train. You don't want to take the auto train. Ship your car, fly. No job too big or too small. Ship Your Car Now moves it all.
Yeah, I think it is. And when you look at the bench last night, okay, so if you were to say that Milwaukee was to get 4 of 19 from Middleton, who is arguably their second best player, 4 of 19 from Middleton and still score 113, well, why does it happen? Because like you said, George Hill goes 6 of 11. Connaughton goes 3 of 7. They get 3 baskets from Ilyasova. He didn't shoot particularly well, but they get 3 baskets. As a, so their bench, last night gave them, over 30 points. Whereas, you look at the Boston bench, Hayward 1 of 5 in 27 minutes for 2 points. Aaron Baines, no scoring. Is not really what he's there to do, but nothing in 7 minutes. Marcus Smart, 1 of 7 from the field in 15 minutes. Not that surprising, but Terry Rozier, somebody who gave you really good minutes last year, has been incredibly inconsistent this whole season. 10 minutes, 1 of 5. So you're getting 7 points from your bench. And so even on a night where Jaylen Brown and Tatum shoot close to 50% combined for 33 points, even when Horford gives you 20, Kyrie struggles, but you get 18 and 14 from Marcus Morris, it's not enough. And I just, you're right. It's not all Ainge's fault, because you don't expect Hayward to get hurt. Obviously, Hayward would be a better player at this stage. But there are some sort of underlying issues with this team. I mean, they may have overrated Rozier, right? I didn't like the Marcus Smart contract at the time. And I said that I just don't. I think he's a good player on a good team with a good fit, but it was a little bit to me of a Heat move. I hate to say that from the Heat's behalf, but it was like, right? I mean, it was like it was paying a guy for culture, I mean, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's a younger version of James Johnson, but it's still paying a guy for culture. Like, is Marcus Smart a guy who's playable at the end of games? I still don't think so. Like, I know that Celtics fans, Marcus Smart, and throw it in your face, but I just didn't see it at the time. I mean, Celtics fans are making the case he's a better player than Winslow. I don't think he is, especially now that Justice can shoot, and Justice can handle. And so there are structural issues with this team. And in Boston, whereas if Milwaukee went out in 5 games, the Milwaukee media was not going to tear them apart, right? It would have been like, okay, they need to get Giannis more help, right? Like, okay, they need to get Giannis more help. But what a great season. What a great job that Bud did. We're going the right direction. We just need playoff experience.
Very quickly before we move on, the one thing that's haunting from a Milwaukee point of view, Giannis in his last 5 games has made 9 threes, 9 of 21 from 3. Right. If he can hit that with any regularity,
we're making the LeBron comparison for a reason. I mean, that is something that people said the same thing about Bron.
Yeah.
And when that started to click, I mean, there's no reason, if you watch Giannis's shot, there's no reason he shouldn't be okay from 3. Like, there's no, I mean, it's not a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist thing. It's not even a Justice thing from the beginning. I'm not saying he's going to be Steph Curry, but there's no reason he can't be a 35 to 37% three-point shooter. And if he is and doesn't fall in love with it, which is always the problem, I go back to, it's not just Bron or Dwayne who did it times. I always used to write about Dwayne doing it. Like, and I wrote a column, during the, I think, 05-06 season, that he was falling in love with it, kind of like Tracy McGrady did, where Tracy sort of figured out how to do it his second or third year. And then his volume started to go up and his percentages started to go down. He got away from what made him himself. And I always warned about that with Dwayne, and Dwayne never became good enough at it for that to be the case.
Well, not until very late in his career.
Right, very late, right? And only for small, weird stretches, right? Sure. So I think when you look at it, for Giannis, it shouldn't be it should never be the weapon for him, but it can be a weapon in the way that it has been for LeBron. And if you look at a lot of sort of LeBron's classic moments, they've come from 3, a lot of them. And that is not something anybody would have projected when he was at the sort of the stage of the career that Giannis is at right now.
And it's not just, having that as something that you could do. It's really a weapon of respect, where if you line up a 3-point shot, that other teams are going to chase you out, and that just opens up the lane again. And that's really what Giannis's game is about, is opening up the lane for himself, whether it's his teammates or himself. And if he can make from 3 with any regularity, that would be incredible. Now, in terms of the other series in the East, I'm really fascinated by this one. I think it's Philadelphia, Toronto, 2-2, heading towards again a 3-game series, 2 games in Toronto. But I think through 4 games, Philadelphia has been much the better team, and I really think that they might end up regretting that Game 4 performance, because it was there for the taking. Right now, it is Kawhi against a group of really talented players, and I think you saw in Game 3 in particular what having that just complete collection of full talent firing on all cylinders. I mean, Philadelphia looked overwhelming in that Game 3, and then Embiid has, multiple illnesses over the course of a couple of days, and he just wasn't nearly the same. I just don't know if he can be the same night in, night out in over the course of 4 rounds in a playoffs. That certainly is a concern. And then kind of the other structural flaws coming with Philly in that Game 4. But the thing right now that has to worry you if you're, supporting Toronto right now is they've got nothing outside of Kawhi. I mean, Kyle Lowry gave you a decent game by playoff standards from a role player, and it's being celebrated. Oh, Kyle Lowry had a decent game, but I mean, compared to what he delivers at times in the regular season, has delivered in years previous, it's not nearly good enough from him. And then just on through, Marc Gasol looks like he's playing hot potato sometimes. Pascal Siakam, obviously dealing with injury, was pretty bad in that Game 4, and they just managed to get over the line. Toronto was kind of a triumph of depth. Particularly in the Lowry-DeRozan era, you give up a little bit of it for Kawhi. You give up a little bit more of it for Marc Gasol, and now they've kind of got nothing but a bare-bones team left.
Yeah, that's true. And you saw when Siakam's numbers started to drop off, kind of what happened, with them putting Embiid on him and changing the matchup there. I just, look, your best players need to play well in the playoffs. I mean, it's very simple. And, we get back to Boston. Kyrie hasn't. Giannis has. Toronto, Kawhi has, but Kyle Lowry has not again. And I just think, I think sometimes we make too much of 1 or 2 postseason performances. But with Kyle, the same with DeRozan, before he left in the trade, it is what it is at this point. There is something in Kyle's head. It's not just that he's not making shots. He's not taking shots. He's not. He thinks of himself. I remember being in Toronto for the sixth series in 16, the second round series, and I've always admired the Toronto media relations department. They are, along with Golden State, the best in the sport in my view, and they're very open. And I remember being at the practice facility, and Kyle was going through a terrible struggle against the Heat, and they brought him out, and he sat at the podium, and he took 12 minutes of questions, and he said he sucked. Okay, and Kyle didn't blame anybody else. He blamed himself. It wasn't forced or fake. It was, him, the style, the way that he kind of has always approached these things. He's very real about this stuff. And then he turned around a little bit at the end of that series. Remember, he shot a ton, okay, after he wasn't really shooting as much. And he didn't make all of them, but he shot a ton. He had that last second shot that people remember. But he was he was at least himself. And but too many times in the postseason, he's gotten himself trapped in these moments. And now he's in this moment where he just doesn't want to shoot. And the problem is Kawhi is not, Kawhi, for all his greatness, and his greatness has been proven in the playoffs, is not the kind of guy who seems like he wants to go out there and try to get you 50. It's just not him, right? So, he came up in the San Antonio system where he learned, okay, I'll get mine after Duncan, and old Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili get theirs. He won an MVP as the fourth option in the finals. That's the way it was. And so, he's not the type who's going to impose himself on the game offensively as a shooter the same way that maybe he ISOs more than he used to, but not the same way that a Harden will. And so if you have two of your other core players and your two other all-stars or guys who've been all-stars and Kyle Lowry and Marc Gasol who will not shoot the ball, how are they going to win the series? Because he's, unless he just goes nuclear, and maybe he's certainly capable of that. But the problem is you're going against a team that has four guys and really a fifth, because when Redick gets going. And so, that to me has always been the issue of this series is, you're right, the depth has been eaten away at a little bit. And mostly I think the assertiveness of their other two sort of core guys, because Ibaka is not what he was either. And Serge was never, he was always, distant fourth option on Oklahoma City, right? Like that's the way that they played it. So it's not going to be him either. So who is it going to be if it's not Kyle Lowry? Like that, because Marc Gasol needs to get his from somewhere else. Like somebody needs to help set him up. So Kyle Lowry needs to shoot the ball. He just needs to shoot it. They have to, if he shoots 4 for 21, he shoots 4 for 21, but you can't have these long stretches where your point guard is not, who is an aggressive shooting point guard by nature, is not looking at the basket. That just can't happen.
We'll get back to today's episode in a second, but first I want to tell you about one of our new sponsors here in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is the attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg. Find them at onecalllegal.com. That's ONE calllegal.com, or actually call 855 5000 Law LAW. They handle cases including but not limited to car accidents, slip and falls, and any personal injury matters. Additionally, if you mention 5 Reasons, they will handle your traffic ticket for $44.99 with a new 15,000 square foot office opening on I-95 in North Miami. They will handle cases all over South Florida. Call now with 24/7 service for a free consultation. OneCallLegal.com or 855-5000-LAW. The attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg, a proud sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You look at this series when Kawhi Leonard steps off the floor, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So on the court, he's played 160 minutes of this 192-minute series. On the court, they're 109.7 points per 100 possessions. Excellent. That's really good. And on defense, 102 points per 100 possessions. That's really good. That's enough to win you a series when Kawhi Leonard's on the floor. Philadelphia is feasting in this series off of the minutes that Kawhi Leonard doesn't play. And it's not really that many. It's on average 8 minutes per game that he's not playing. But on the court, with him off the court, their offensive rating is 61. That is balling. That's like 40 points worse than the Phoenix Suns. I mean, that is as bad as it gets. And they just have nothing when he steps off the court. Whereas, I mean, you kind of look at it from Philly's standpoint, Philadelphia, so Toronto in the last game basically played a 6-man rotation. They started Siakam, Leonard, Gasol, Lowry, Green, and they brought Ibaka off the bench for 32 minutes. By the way, if Siakam missed that game, I have no idea what the hell they would have done, because Van Vliet played 7 minutes, Patrick McCaw played 5, Norm Powell played 4, and everyone else is a DNP. So that's 17 minutes from other guys on the Raptors other than those original 6. I mean, you're basically playing a 6-man rotation, whereas Philly is getting stuff out of James Ennis, which Heat fans might be surprised to see. Mike Scott is giving them, at least decent role minutes off the bench. Greg Monroe, but I mean, Boban has occasionally had moments for them in the postseason. I mean, you wouldn't have thought that Philadelphia's advantage in the series might have been depth, but even beyond that, just that starting 5 and what they look like in Game 3, I just can't get that out of my head. And I think the Philly fans might have been going a little crazy as well, because that's what it looks like at its best, right? And I was reading an article today about what Brett Brown has been doing in this postseason. It was kind of identifying, okay, Tobias is good at this and Simmons is good at that, and it did seem like a lot of it was contradictory, right? Where, Jimmy Butler is really good in the pick and roll with Embiid, but we want to get Simmons going in the open court, and Simmons might be good as a screener, but Tobias Harris is really good in the pick and roll, and, decent enough. Like, it's hard to figure out the best way to optimize all 5 of those guys when they're playing together. But when they do, I don't think there's a team in the NBA with a higher ceiling, and I include Golden State in that conversation, because it's a perfect confluence of guys where you have to make Sophie's choices all over the floor, and you just don't know what who to sag off of, and the answer might be Ben Simmons. I mean, particularly because of his lack of shooting, but when he's going, he can certainly find other ways to contribute on offense. But Philadelphia in this series, and really going forward in these postseason, if they end up playing Milwaukee in the conference finals, I think they can give them a really difficult series. And yet I also can see, just because Kawhi Leonard has gone supernova in this postseason, and that's something that I want to talk about here. Kawhi Leonard, and I mentioned how bad they were with him off the floor, but on the floor, he might be the single greatest influence in the postseason right now. And there was a conversation that was had for a couple of days over the weekend, which was, would you rather have Kawhi or KD right now as best player in the playoffs? And then last night, Giannis goes, I would like to be included in that conversation as well, please. But, I mean, Kawhi as a leading man, obviously it depends on where he goes, for his future, but I think Kawhi Leonard has got a solid 3 or 4 years as the leading man, and right now it does seem like best player in the NBA is vacant, just because LeBron heading into his post-prime era with a team that might not be best suited to take advantage of his skills. I think Kawhi is certainly in that conversation, best player in the league, what he's doing on both ends of the floor in this series and in these playoffs.
Yeah, and now we look at 3 guys that are leading their teams right now, or one of the leaders of their teams. They're all going to be free agents after the season, all of whom could get bounced in this round.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Kawhi Leonard could be out. Kyrie Irving likely going to be out. Kevin Durant could be out. I think it was likely that all 3 were going to move teams anyway. If they lose in the second round, it's a given.
For sure.
So I just think, although it's going to look really bad for KD, I will say that, because if they lose in the second round, he comes to a team to win a championship. It was a given championship, and then as soon as it starts to go bad, he bolts. It's going to look pretty terrible, but I still think he's going to do that anyway. I think Kawhi's decision to some degree, and I think this is Masai Ujiri's burden now, I think his decision's been kind of made for him in the series.
Mm-hmm.
If he can't carry them through, then he's got to look at it and be like, okay, all right, so what am I staying here for? Like, I mean, I'll
especially when Toronto had done so well to take care of his body this year and give him rest games and still win a ton of games anyway. If he can't even sit on the bench for 5 minutes in between the first and the second quarter because Toronto's going to get run off the floor, then what's the point of preserving his body?
Exactly. So I just don't. I think we're going to see a lot of turnover here, and again, it plays into the Philadelphia side of the series too. Let's go to the West and to Golden State, Houston. Obviously, it's funny. I was in Vegas. I was working. I was doing something, meeting with some people, and then got out and saw what happened, which was the third overtime of the Denver series. And we'll get to that. I do want to touch on that series a little bit because I think it's been revealing about kind of both teams and the idea of how you need to build the team in the NBA. But let's go to Houston, Golden State first. And there's really two storylines in this series. The first storyline is that Golden State has basically decided, Steve Kerr has decided that 5 guys are playable.
Yeah.
And so, I think what you see with what happens to dynasties in the NBA and the salary cap era is you can continue to pay luxury tax and pay luxury tax and pay luxury tax, and you can keep your stars. But if you're going to do that, eventually something else is going to crater. And we saw it at the end with the Heat in that last year where they were giving Tony Douglas and Michael Beasley minutes. And now we're seeing a Golden State team that Steve Kerr has just decided, no, I'm not playing any of them. Like, if they get Cousins back, they get Cousins back. And I know he said now he plans to come back some point during the playoffs, provided they're still around. But it's the Hamptons 5 lineup, and that is it. And the only reason it's working to some degree is because Iguodala is playing at a level higher than he should be at his age. But they don't have anything else. And, it's going to be really interesting this offseason to see if Durant goes, how they kind of reshape this thing, because I don't even see any players in their system that I like. Like, I don't. They've had some guys they've tried to develop, and like an Ian Clark or McCaw and others, and nobody has sort of stepped forward. I mean, Looney is the only one who's shown any promise, and he's not a frontline player. They just haven't developed anybody. Jordan Bell a couple of years ago was supposed to be an option. And, what they really need, honestly, is the Heat's development department, like just to find 2 pieces. Yeah. And they haven't found them.
It is kind of amazing. I think Golden State, in theory, could do that. But I just think it's so hard, and we saw it with Miami during the Big Three era, to do both at the same time. Compete for championships and also bring along guys in development and have that apparatus. Because really the apparatus in terms of player acquisition is about who can help us win the championship this year, not who can develop into a player that can maybe, down the line. I think they've done okay with Alfonso McKinney, but other than that, you're right. I mean, it really is hard for these, top-end NBA teams to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I don't know that it costs them ultimately if they're top 3 go supernova, but we've seen that it eats into portions of the game for them. And this kind of happened again in game 4. Like, anytime they play anybody who's out of that top 5, they suffer, and then they have to make it up at the end. And so, I mean, the only way they're going to get through this thing, because Houston, here's the thing that's different about Houston and every other team in the league. The Rockets believe they're better than the Warriors.
Sure.
They were saying that last year. I don't think any other team in the league believes that. I think the Rockets believe that. I think they feel like, even without some of the guys they had last year, Bamute and Ariza, etc., they feel like their core is good enough. Guys like PJ Tucker are not back down guys. It's the reason they would not trade him. Remember, all that was going on for Jimmy Butler, and the thing was, is PJ Tucker in the deal or not in the deal? And people are like, glorified role player. Yes, perhaps, right? But I mean, the Heat pay a lot for glorified role players. And this one, last night, gave him 42 minutes, 3 threes, 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 assists. And if you're going to get that, if you're going to get some scoring from Austin Rivers off the bench, if you're going to get a 3 from Iman Shumpert and some decent defense, when, Iman's somebody we gave up on a long time ago, they know what they are. And a lot of teams that go against the Warriors don't know what they are. And I hate watching it. I don't want to see them in the next round. Okay. But they know what they are. They've developed a style. D'Antoni deserves credit for that. And so you look on the other side, and you get the 34 from Durant, and you get the 30 from Curry, and you get the poor shooting game from Klay Thompson, which unfortunately for the Warriors has become a little too common in the playoffs. But then what are you going to get from anywhere else? I mean, you got a box score game from Draymond. Iguodala, you're not expecting scoring, but again, that bench. I mean, 1 basket for Livingston, 2 baskets for Looney, 1 basket for McKinney, and that's it. I mean, it's just they don't have. He's only playing 8, and he's only giving minutes. If you look at the minutes, he's giving 47 minutes total to the bench. So even Houston, who's only really played 2 big minutes, they gave over 60 minutes to the bench. So I just think when you look at where the Warriors are right now, these are the dying breaths of a dynasty, okay? And it's, can you squeeze out one more before it goes away? It doesn't mean they're not going to be contenders. It doesn't mean they're not going to be competitive. But we've seen this with other teams. The Detroit Pistons, who had that sort of core 5 group, like they squeezed out another title, and like you kind of knew, okay, that was it, right? They didn't have a whole lot left. Like they got there again against San Antonio because they got past the Heat, only because Wade hurt his ribcage muscle. But then the next year, the Heat took care of them, even in the 1 seed. You kind of know when teams get to that point. And we saw with the Lakers, with the Kobe Shaq Lakers, like you knew, like that was, I mean, they brought in Karl Malone and Gary Payton right out of the mausoleum, right, and tried to make something work there and didn't work. I feel like that's where we are with Golden State. Like the DeMarcus Cousins was the lifeline move. Like, let's keep it alive for one more year at that level. And because it took him a long time to get back, and then after he went out, he got hurt. You know, we haven't seen the benefits of that. There was no plan B this year. And it's very hard to get a plan B. Even if you say you're light years ahead of the competition, it's hard to get a plan B in a salary cap league.
Yeah, and I'm kind of concerned for them and what that looks like, particularly as, Klay Thompson enters free agency. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be able to add, even if Kevin Durant leaves. If Kevin Durant leaves, I don't know if they're going to be able to have the salary cap space, especially after Steph Curry took that Supermax, where he's basically going to be on $40 million a season. And I actually want to talk about Curry here, because I think the difference right now in the series last night is just how much more Houston is doing from three. I mean, James Harden had the step-back three going. If he makes 3 or 4 of those in a game, I'm not sure you can beat them, because, I mean, it just opens up everything for James Harden. And as much as watching him get there is odious and difficult to look at, when he does have it going, and when he is hitting those shots and doing well in the lane, like, the highlights themselves are fun to look at, but it's just the getting there that can be just so plodding and awful. But from a Golden State standpoint, I think Steph Curry is my biggest concern. Takes a ton of criticism in Game 3 and deserved it. He was horrendous. And I was listening to a couple of basketball podcasts talking about what's wrong with Steph Curry. I mean, we've seen this really the entirety of this Golden State run. Is there are times in the postseason where he just doesn't have it, and some of it is just the make or miss nature of having a 3-point based game. And I think last night the difference was what Golden State didn't do from three. They were 8 of 33, whereas Houston was 17 of 50. I mean, you make 9 more threes, and that's why Houston believes that they're on level pegging, because they're one of the few teams in the league that feels like they can go toe to toe, if not better, Golden State from three. And that can be the difference in a game. But Steph Curry is an interesting one. So I think a lot of people are talking about, is it that, and Bill Simmons did this whole, thing about it's actually kind of Kevin Durant's team now, and there's, a mental block about who's actually in charge. I don't think it's any of that. I think what people have failed to talk about for 5 years with Steph Curry when it comes to him coming short, beyond the injuries, beyond all that stuff, is that teams pick on him on defense. He actually has to defend more than anyone else on the floor for Golden State. And I think that wears him out. Like, it's actually right. There's never been a better time in the NBA to be really good on defense, because it means you don't have to do any defending, because teams are so constantly putting, we want Curry switched on to Harden. If you're, like, you want JJ Redick doing a ton of defending for Philadelphia, against Kawhi Leonard. Like, you put his guy in a pick and roll and see how they handle it, whether it's a switch or whether it's a trap. Either way, you're making the worst guy on the other team enter that pick and roll, so that if they decide to switch, that guy's one-on-one with the best offensive player, and Steph Curry is the weakest link on defense. And it's one of the things in the NBA that just is an unavoidable fact. Size and athleticism plays a big role in who can be the best guy. And I've kind of learned that over these last few years, because I was kind of making an argument for a while, why can't Steph Curry be the best guy? He can't be the best guy because he's not big enough and not athletic enough, which is harsh on him, because Steph Curry can't do anything about that. But when he's 6'3", and isn't really that, he's not Russell Westbrook in terms of athleticism, he's not really going to be able to stay in front of everyone, and he's constantly being put in defensive actions. Houston has done a really good job of taking Steph Curry out of the series by constantly putting him in pick and rolls, by constantly getting him in foul trouble, and forcing him to make decisions that can potentially, I think in Game 2, he came damn close to fouling out. Like, the amount of defensive work that he has to do is limiting him in this series, both from three and obviously in terms of that mental fatigue. And so in the fourth quarter, obviously he makes that three that made it a 2-point game in the final minute, but then he also has a chance to win the game, tie the game and send it to overtime, and it didn't go in for him. And while that could just be he missed a three, it could also be that he's played 48 minutes of basketball in which he's doing a lot of defending, and that's something that I think gets missed with Steph Curry a lot, is just how much he gets put in those pick and rolls and asked to guard Harden on the outside. That's a ton of work to ask of a guy that isn't really that good on defense. I think that plays a huge role in Golden State maybe struggling from three, and him being such a key part of what they do, maybe not having it going offensively often enough in this series.
Yeah, and I think that's why when we talk about the best player in the league, it makes it hard to pick Steph, even if he's the one you want to watch.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of where we're at with him. And it's why we sort of then move him into another category, which is greatest shooter or greatest shooter who could also handle and pass, right? Or, that's like, how do you separate him from a Ray Allen? Well, because Ray, except for a couple of years of his career, was not, somebody who was going to be taking the ball to the basket and doing a ton of those things. And so we put Steph in other categories. But when you start to move him into the LeBron, Giannis, Kawhi category, you're right. He just doesn't literally measure up. And I think that's, again, why he's been able to be schemed out. It doesn't make him any less dangerous. It just means that it's harder to sort of count on him as the guy night after night. And that's going to be the big issue when Durant leaves, provided that Durant does leave, is Steph's going to be the guy again. And I mean, unless they bring back Boogie Cousins, he's going to be the guy. It's been proven you can't really count on Clay, even if he does return. Draymond's not that type of scorer. And so, Steph now, after sort of being able to operate, not in the shadows, because he never does, but more so than he used to, now he's going to be put back in the middle of it again, where everybody's going to be throwing everything at him. And so I love watching him. I hate watching Harden. But I've got to give respect to what Houston's done in this series, because I think D'Antoni's done some very creative things defensively. But I think ultimately, when you talk about Curry's size, I think the thing that gets to him the most is, I think once we start to get deeper in the playoffs, he just gets tired.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're starting to see is, with Golden State, not only, is he being asked to be carrying more of the scoring burden maybe than ordinary because Clay is not playing well, but also, as I said, they don't have any bench. So, I mean, you can't even grab 3 or 4 minutes for him and feel comfortable with it. Like, he has to be on the floor, and he's playing in the 40s every night. I just feel, when you look at what, when they were going to 73 wins, Steph wasn't playing fourth quarters. He wasn't, it didn't matter. Like, they were up by so much, and the bench was not this awful. So it was like you could put them in and you could be up 12 in the fourth. And, okay, we're going to shut Steph down. If it gets down to 7, we'll put him back in. That was happening every night. Like, the 73-win team, like, he played like a third of the fourth quarters. So I just think that's the position they're in.
Before we move on, I just want to ask, this series, there's 3 games left. How dangerous? So Golden State right now are minus 200 favorites. Houston are plus 162 to win the series. What would you sort of say is the chance that Houston can actually do this? Win 4 out of 5 games against the Golden State Warriors, have to win win 1 game on the road. What would you say is the chance that Houston could actually do this?
I think they could do it. I think they can do it. And I thought this would be a series that would go 7. I thought Golden State would win. But I think they can do it. I don't think the Warriors are impenetrable at home anymore. I think whenever you have a team that's somewhat fractured, which the Warriors are, like, that stuff comes out in deciding games. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that so many times. And so I wouldn't put it past them at all to have a bad performance in a Game 7 at home. I think it's very doable. I don't think how many you win in a row or something like that matters at this stage. I think Houston, it's belief, and it's a formula that they have. And if they're true to their formula and they believe they can win against a team that is playing 5 guys, I think it's doable. I mean, you only need a couple more bad shooting games from Clay and Curry to have 1 bad shooting game, and there'll be a loss in there somewhere. And so I absolutely think it's possible. I don't want to see it, because I'm one of the few that I want to see the Warriors because I prefer the way they play, but I absolutely think that it's doable. I want to go to the other series here, Denver and Portland. And I mean, obviously this has been the most competitive of the series. It's hard for me to separate the teams sometimes. They're only separated through 4 games by 2 points. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what conclusions we can draw. Portland has been ultra competitive even when Lillard has not shot well. They're getting performances. We talked about George Hill earlier. Like, George Hill looked unplayable next to LeBron. So did Rodney Hood. And they're getting teams, scoring from Rodney Hood.
He hits the biggest shot in quadruple overtime in Game 3 to win the game. Like, Rodney Hood made that biggest shot.
Unplayable. Absolutely unplayable with Cleveland. So how to evaluate this series, I don't know. I mean, it feels like the undercard, but a lot of undercards can be better than the main event. And so in the case of the West, we've gotten 2 really compelling series. I think for Portland, though, they don't win this series unless Lillard sustains a hot streak. And it comes back to the Kyrie thing. I don't know that you can count on a Rodney Hood or some of their supporting pieces later we get into this series. But for Denver, which of the guards is going to be consistent? And that to me is the big thing there. But I honestly, I thought this was a coin flip series. I still see it as that. I don't really feel like either team has imposed its will because I don't know what its will is.
Sure.
I mean, they both like to play slightly up tempo. Both of them, rely, heavily on guards and 3-point shooting for a lot of scoring. I mean, the big difference obviously is that for Denver, their fulcrum is their center, but I just don't see a lot of breathing room here. I feel like if Lillard gets hot, that is the tipping point. Like if he gets on one of those runs, we saw that in a game in Miami here a couple years ago. He was totally unguardable. Like if he gets on one of those runs, he's giving you 38 to 41 on, close to 50% shooting, hitting a bunch of threes. I do believe they win this series. But if he's slightly off, I think it's very, very possible that Denver advances here.
Agreed. And I by the way, you talk about imposing wills. The one will that I think has been imposed so far on this series is that Damian Lillard has not really been that good so far. I mean, you look at, the last 3 games, even the games that they won game 2 on the road, and he was 5 of 17, and they won the quadruple overtime game. He was only 10 of 24 in a quadruple overtime game. Played 58 minutes. I mean, that box score is hilarious, by the way. But I don't think Damian Lillard has really imposed his will in this series, and you're right. If he does eventually get there, I think that might be game over as well, by the way, as Jokic and Murray are playing. And that, I think, is kind of the breakout storyline so far of this postseason for Denver, is how well Jokic's game has translated to the postseason, has a triple-double in that quadruple overtime game. But just, I mean, you're watching some of the passes that he pulls off in the middle of a playoff game. It's incredible, the fact that his game translates. He played 65 minutes in that quadruple overtime game and manages 2 nights later to come out and still keep that, they keep that game competitive despite and win the game despite losing in that game 3 in such devastating fashion. But I'm really interested in this series just because of what Jokic can do in particular. The fact that his game, it was funny because I think it was in the middle of the quadruple overtime game. Maybe it was game 4. I was watching game 4, and Jokic, towards the end of the game as they're winning, comes off because he looks like he's picked up an injury. And it was funny because they went back and showed on the TNT replay. I think this is the moment where he got hurt, but Jokic just looks so pained all the time running up and down the court and looks so herky-jerky and unathletic that, wait, how is him being hurt any different than him being not hurt? Like, it didn't look any different. But the fact that his game has translated has been really fun to watch. But I think this series comes down to the performances of Lillard and of Murray, who's become a bit more consistent. In round 1, he was very up and down, even within games. There was one game in that San Antonio series where he was dreadful for 3 quarters and then wins the game in the 4th. But I think what Murray has done to become a little bit more consistent, Jokic as well. I do think, though, the series comes down to Lillard and whether or not he can, on a consistent basis, be that supernova type player that he was in the first round to win Portland games. I think that it's going to take those kinds of performances to win this series. But I think, if we're saying which one is most likely to go 7 of the ones that are tied at 2-2 right now, I'd definitely say Portland and Denver.
Yeah, I think this one's going 7. I don't see the team breaking away from the other for 2 straight games. And, so you'll have one of these teams completely exhausted before they face a Houston Golden State team that probably will be exhausted too, especially if it's the Warriors and they're all playing 48 minutes in game 7, which is very possible. I remember I go back to the Celtics Heat series, one of those series, during the Big 3 era, where Doc Rivers played 6 guys. That was it. Like he was done with everybody else. He was playing 6 guys, and that's where Steve Kerr is. And I think it tells you it's hard to call a team the greatest of all time when they have 5 players they trust at this stage. We're just sort of, these are the wheezing moments of a dynasty. It happens to all of them. It doesn't mean they're not going to be competitive, but the Warriors, as we know them, I think even if they win a championship this year, I think we've seen the peak. I don't know how they rebuild it, from the bottom of the draft without a great development program. Obviously you're going to have one guys want to come and play with Steph, but there'll be some guys who don't, because they'll kind of look at it like what happened with Durant, which is that Durant came out there and has performed at, whatever you think of Kevin, he's performed at a really high level, and it's still Curry's team in the eyes of the fans. So sure. I don't know that another star wants to deal with that. I mean, it has to be a star like a Kawhi who doesn't seem to care about that, and there are very, very, very few of those. So We'll do more NBA next week. Obviously, later in the week, we're planning on talking to Kirk Goldsberry. We have an NFL episode coming up later this week. We're scheduled to talk to Dave Pasch, and he is the play-by-play voice for the Arizona Cardinals. I had some things to say on social media after the Dolphins got Josh Rosen. He kind of pushed back on the idea that Josh Rosen was a bad character guy. Pasch also calls basketball games.
Yeah, he was actually on the call. I was watching the highlights back this morning, prepping for the pod. He called the quadruple overtime game, so we can ask him about that. I mean, I can't even imagine how fun that must have been. He was with Doris Burke on that game. That must have been huge fun as well.
Yeah, no doubt. So we'll talk a little basketball with Dave, but obviously we want to get into a lot of Josh Rosen. All right, so we'll talk to you soon, and make sure you check out the website again, 5reasonsports.com.
Thank you for listening to the 5 Reasons Podcast. Thank you so much.